The Last Hand Dealt, a story by Michael Anthony Neal Jr. Part 1. The Setup. The Cabrini Green Towers didn't kill everybody. Some people it just marked. Darius, Smooth, Washington had been marked since the night his mother pressed a crisp $50 bill into his 9-year-old hand and told him to go buy groceries, and he came back 3 hours later with nothing but a story about how a dice game looked more promising. She whipped him until her arm got tired. But something in his eyes had already changed. The hunger was there, not the kind that comes from an empty stomach, but the kind that lives in the chest, behind the ribs, gnawing at everything decent a person might have been. By 22, Smooth was the most talented con man on the south side of Chicago. He wasn't big, wasn't particularly intimidating. What he had was a face that looked like it belonged in church, wide brown eyes that carried just enough sadness to make women want to save him, just enough warmth to make men trust him. He could walk into a room as a pastor, a contractor, a social worker, a city inspector. He wore personas like other men wore cologne. His partner was a woman named Renee. Lord have mercy, Renee. She was the kind of beauty that made men stupid and women hate. 5'7", honey brown skin, natural hair that she wore in twists on Sundays and loose on Fridays when she needed something. She'd grown up 3 buildings down from Smooth in the Ida B. Wells projects on the East End. They'd been running together since 16, and somewhere between the scams and the escapes, between the laughing in stolen cars and crying over close calls, they'd fallen into something that wasn't quite love but was too deep to call anything else. They had a system. Renee would identify the mark. Smooth would work them. They'd split 60-40, Smooth taking the 60 because, as he always said, the face does the heavy lifting, baby. Renee had stopped arguing about that split 2 years ago. But she hadn't stopped keeping count. Part 2. The Score. The mark's name was Gerald Watkins. 56 years old, retired city alderman. He lived in a brownstone off Michigan Avenue but still drove back to the projects every third Sunday to drop money in the collection plate at Greater Harvest Baptist Church, not out of faith, but out of visibility. Gerald had a reputation to maintain. He also had a floor safe behind the painting in his study. Renee knew because she'd spent 3 weeks getting close to his housekeeper, a sweet woman named Miss Odette who talked too much when someone brought her a sweet potato pie and a listening ear. The safe held $240,000 in cash, Gerald's insurance money, as he called it. Money that had never seen a tax form. Money that couldn't be reported stolen without Gerald explaining where it came from. It was a perfect score. The con was elegant. Smooth posed as a federal housing consultant named Drive Marcus Webb, complete with a fake government badge that cost him $400 from a man in Englewood who asked no questions. He got a meeting with Gerald under the pretense of a lucrative redevelopment deal, city money flowing into Gerald's old ward, and Dr. Webb needed a community liaison willing to sign off on some paperwork. 10% finder's fee. Gerald's eyes had done the math before Smooth finished the sentence. 2 meetings at a downtown coffee shop. 1 dinner at a steakhouse where Smooth let Gerald pick up the check because marks always trust who they're feeding. Then the 3rd meeting, at Gerald's brownstone, where Smooth needed to review sensitive documents, and Gerald, greedy and glittering-eyed, had led him directly past the study. Renee came in through the back door at 9:47 p.m. while Smooth kept Gerald talking in the living room. She was in and out in 11 minutes. Part 3. The Fracture. They should have left Chicago that night. That was the plan. 2 bags. 2 bus tickets to Atlanta. New names in a new city. Smooth had a cousin in Decatur who owed him a favor and a place to stay. But Darius, Smooth, Washington did what he always did when money was close, he got reckless. There was a man named Terrell Knox who ran a poker game out of a barbershop on 47th Street every Friday night. Smooth had been up $20,000 at that table before. He'd also lost $12,000 in a single hand and borrowed from people who charged interest in broken fingers. He told Renee he needed 2 hours. She told him if he walked into that barbershop, she'd leave without him. He kissed her on the forehead and walked in anyway. The thing about addiction is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't stand in the doorway with a sign. It just lives inside of you, wearing the same face as confidence, the same clothes as control, whispering that this time is different. This time you've got enough to lose and still walk away whole. Smooth lost $60,000 in 4 hours. He borrowed 20 more from Terrell Knox and lost that too. By 3 a.m., he was sitting on a plastic chair with nothing but the clothes on his back and a sick certainty spreading through his stomach. He pulled out his phone. 8 missed calls from Renee. Then a text, sent at midnight. I told you. I took my 40. Don't look for me. Part 4. The collapse. What Smooth didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Renee's math had been different for months. She hadn't taken 40% of $240,000. She'd taken the whole safe. The $240,000 Gerald kept for emergencies. There had been more. A second envelope. Terrell Knox, the same Terrell Knox who ran the poker game, had also been using Gerald's safe. An arrangement between two dirty men. Knox had stored an additional $160,000 in that safe, cash from distribution operations across 3 neighborhoods. Renee had found it all. $400,000 total. She'd told Smooth the safe held $240,000. She'd pocketed the difference before they ever counted together. When Smooth came crawling back to their apartment at 4 a.m., Renee was gone. The closet was empty. Her half of the money was gone, which, unknown to him, was really 3/4 of the money. Smooth tore the apartment apart. He called her phone until it went straight to voicemail. He sat in the dark on the kitchen floor, back against the refrigerator, and felt something crack open inside him. Not heartbreak, he'd survive heartbreak. This was the specific, nauseating devastation of knowing you'd been outconned. By morning, 2 problems arrived simultaneously. Gerald Watkins had figured out he'd been robbed. He didn't call the police. He called Terrell Knox. And Terrell Knox called everyone. Part 5. The Walls Close. They caught Smooth at a Greyhound station buying a ticket to Memphis. Not Knox's people, the actual police. A detective named Simmons who'd been watching Gerald Watkins for 14 months as part of a corruption investigation. When Gerald's safe turned up empty, Simmons saw an opportunity to flip a small-time con man into a cooperative witness. Smooth spent 48 hours in an interrogation room. He gave them nothing on Gerald. Not because he was loyal, loyalty had died on the floor of that apartment. But because Gerald's lawyers arrived before Smooth's public defender, and the charge landscape shifted in ways that left Smooth holding everything. Conspiracy, fraud, breaking and entering. They stacked the charges like firewood. He took a plea deal. 7 years at the Stateville Correctional Center. 7 years. He was 23 years old. Part 6. Inside, prison changed Smooth in ways that were visible and ways that weren't. The visible changes came fast. He got bigger, not the gym vanity big, but the kind of solid that comes from having nothing but time and push-ups. The softness left his face. The wide, trustworthy eyes got harder at the edges. The invisible changes took longer. He read, voraciously, desperately, like a man trying to outrun himself through words. History, philosophy, the Bible, all of it, not just the verses people embroider on pillows, but the raw, difficult parts. Job sitting in his suffering. David, beloved of God, is still capable of arranging a man's death out of lust and pride. The whole mess of human nature laid out plainly, without apology. He thought about Renee constantly. Jealousy was a living thing, not just that she'd taken the money, but that she'd been better than him. Sharper, more patient, she'd played the long game inside their long game, and he'd never seen it. The woman he'd trusted with everything had been running her own con the entire time. He loved her and hated her and envied her all at once, and the 3 feelings twisted together until he couldn't separate them. In year 4, a man named Brother Cecil ran a Bible study in the multi-purpose room on Tuesday evenings. Smooth started going to avoid another inmate who owed him commissary. He kept going because Brother Cecil said something one Tuesday that Smooth couldn't shake. Jonah ran from what God told him to do. Got swallowed up, sat in darkness, but even in the belly of that thing, even there, he wasn't finished. The question ain't whether you got swallowed. The question is what you do while you're inside. Smooth didn't get religion, not exactly, but he got something adjacent to it, a framework for understanding that the choices he'd made hadn't been inevitable. That hunger was real, but what you fed it was a decision. Part 7. The Outside. He served 5 years and 8 months with good behavior. The South Side looked the same and nothing like itself. The projects were mostly gone now, torn down and replaced with mixed-income developments that the original residents couldn't afford. The barber shop on 47th where he'd lost everything was a smoothie place. Terrell Knox had been shot dead in 2019 outside a currency exchange. Gerald Watkins had been indicted the previous year. Detective Simmons had finally gotten what he needed through other means. Smooth got a job at a print shop in Bronzeville through a re-entry program. He was good with his hands. He kept his head down. He went to see his mother, who was 61 now and moved slower, and she let him in and fed him and didn't say "I told you so" even once, which was the greatest mercy he'd ever received. He had been out for 3 months when Renee found him. She looked the same, older in the eyes. She was standing outside the print shop at closing time, leaning against a car that cost more than Smooth made in a year. He stopped. His heart did several things at once. "I heard you were out," she said. "Where's the money?" he asked. She laughed, not cruelly. Almost sadly. "Gone. Most of it. Atlanta was expensive. Living was expensive." They stood in the cold for a long moment. "You should have told me about the rest of it," he said. "We could have left together." "No," she said quietly. "You would have gambled it." He opened his mouth to argue. Closed it. Because she wasn't wrong. She had never been wrong about him. That was the thing about being loved by someone, really seen by someone. They know the worst of you and account for it, even when accounting for it means protecting themselves from you. "So what do you want?" he asked. She reached into the car and handed him an envelope. $40,000, cash. "Your 40%, she said. "From the original take. What I always owed you." He looked at the envelope. Looked at her. "Renee, don't," she said. She got in the car. "You shouldn't have made it out, Darius. Most people who go through what you went through don't come back as anything worth keeping. But you did." She paused. "Don't waste it this time." She drove away. He stood on the sidewalk in Bronzeville with $40,000 and the strange, gutting grace of a second chance he had not earned and could not explain. He thought about Job, about Jonah, about David, about all the people the story wasn't supposed to survive, and did anyway. He put the envelope inside his jacket, close to his chest, and walked home. Some people the projects mark. A rare few, they release. Darius Washington was one of them. He never gambled again. About the author. Michael Anthony Neal Jr. is a seasoned and versatile writer whose literary ambition is matched only by his relentless creative drive. Refusing to be confined to a single voice or genre, Neal has built a reputation as a storyteller who challenges himself at every turn, moving fluidly between suspense thrillers, drama, literary fiction, and spiritual narrative with the confidence of a writer who understands that the human condition cannot be contained in one lane. Neal's work is grounded in a powerful creative philosophy, that the most compelling fiction is built on the bones of real life. His characters breathe because they are drawn from real people, real struggles, real choices, real consequences, filtered through a fictional lens that gives readers permission to see themselves honestly. He writes the hood without apology and without exploitation. He writes about love without softening its complications. He writes failure and redemption not as opposites, but as the same long road. What sets Neal apart is his deep engagement with faith and scripture, not as decoration but as architecture. He writes fictional religious texts and narratives that stand boldly alongside biblical themes, characters, and theology, creating stories that challenge readers spiritually while remaining fiercely grounded in the world as it actually exists. His work asks the questions that preachers sometimes avoid. What does grace look like in a project hallway? Where is God in a prison cell? Can a con man be chosen? Michael Anthony Neal Jr. does not write to impress. He writes to account for lives that might otherwise go unrecorded, to ensure that the Dariuses and the Renees and the Miss Odettes of the world are rendered in full, with complexity and dignity and truth. His goal is simple and enormous, to tell as many stories as he can, in as many genres as the craft will allow, for as long as his hands will move. He is only getting started.